Hi everyone, good day to each one of you who is currently watching this video. So we have come to week 7 of our online lecture class, yeah? Hopefully all of you are still doing well in everything, especially in this course. Alright, for today's lesson, we are going to look at the development of democracy and political development in Malaysia, mainly since Tunku Abdul Rahman's reign until current time. I'm going to break or divide chapter 4 lesson into two, yeah? Therefore, for today, you will only need to learn about the first half of chapter 4. Before I start, please bear in mind that you need to put your focus on the year and if possible the date of the progress of political changes in Malaysia. By then, you would understand the development and changes as well. Okay, let's start our lesson now. As usual, before we move on to our lesson, I'll expose to you the syllabus content first, yeah? Okay, for the syllabus content for chapter 4, we are going to look at 4.2. I skipped the introduction now. 4.2, the democracy in Malaysia. It is about compromise and cooperation. The period is from 1957 until 1969. This is for phase 1, yeah? And then for 4.3, democracy in Malaysia, compromise to control. 1970 until 1980. This is considered in phase 2. And then 4.4 about Mahathiriism, 1990 until 2003, considered in phase 3. 4.5 reformist and liberalist, the period 2003 until 2018, considered in phase 4. And then last but not least, 4.6 Malaysia Baharu, the period 2018 until now. It is considered in phase 5. But we are not going to look at point 4.4 until 4.6 for this week, yeah? We are going to look at 4.1 until 4.3 only. Okay, let's start with the introduction first. Of course, as usual, introduction is all about the meaning, the definition, and anything to do with the concept itself. So what is actually democracy? Democracy, according to Abraham Lincoln, it is government of the people, by the people, for the people. A simple understanding of democracy, democracy is actually a system of government that bases its legitimacy on the participation of the people. While democratic governments come in many varieties, they are uniformly characterized by, there are 3 characteristics here, yeah? The first one, competitive elections. Second, the principle of political and legal equality. And the third one, a high degree of individual freedom or civil liberties. Due to reliance on elections, democracies have as their default principle the concept of majority rule. Okay, class, these 3 criteria are very important, yeah? Competitive elections, the principle of political and legal equality, and high degree of individual freedom. And then the democracies have their default principle, which is the concept of majority rule. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, types of democracy. So we actually have a lot of types here for democracy, not only democracy itself. So democracy comes in many shapes and sizes, as you can see here. First one, direct democracy versus representative democracy. Secondly, constitutional democracy versus non-constitutional democracy. Thirdly, federal democracy versus unitary democracy. Fourthly, presidential democracy versus parliamentary democracy. Okay, from all this list, the first one, which one represents Malaysia? The second one, right? And then second, constitutional democracy. The third one, federal democracy. Fourthly, it's parliamentary democracy. So what is exactly each of democracy is all about? Okay, I'll explain in detail of each democracy type, yeah. So for direct democracy, a direct democracy is a system of government in which public decisions are made by the people directly rather than by elected representatives. Generally only possible in small communities, although elements of direct democracy exist in California's referenda, initiatives, and recall elections. A representative democracy is a form of government in which representatives are elected to make policy and enforce laws while representing the citizens. All modern democratic countries are representative, not direct democracies. A representative democracy is also known as a republic. It's sometimes called as a republic, yeah? Okay, how about constitutional democracy? So, a constitutional democracy is a system of government based on popular sovereignty in which the structures, powers, and limits of government are set forth in a constitution. Means the implementation of democracy is based on constitutional as the guideline, yeah? This is just like our country, Malaysia. However, a non-constitutional democracy is a form of government that does not have or follow constitutional rules. The government does whatever those currently in power choose to do. For a citizen, such governments are unpredictable and they may violate a person's rights with impunity. Okay, next one, federal democracy. A federal democracy is a system of government in which power is constitutionally divided between a central governing authority and constituent political units like states or provinces. Okay, we have learned about this last week, yeah, about federal democracy. Each enforces its own law directly on its citizens, and neither the national government nor constituent political units can alter the arrangement without the consent of the other. Meanwhile, for a unitary democracy, it is a system of government in which constitutional authority lies in the hands of a single central government. Administrative divisions, or it is also called subnational units, created by the central government are responsible for the everyday administration of government, but exercise only powers the central government chooses to delegate. Great Britain is an example of a country with a unitary system of government, yeah guys. Okay, number 4, the presidential democracy versus parliamentary, yeah. So, a presidential democracy is a form of government in which the executive branch is elected separately from the legislative branch. The chief executive, the president, is elected for a fixed term and cannot be removed except by extraordinary measures. The powers vested in the president are usually balanced against those vested in the legislature. In the American presidential system, the legislature must debate and pass bills, yeah? The president has the power to veto a bill, preventing its adoption. However, the legislature may override the president's veto if it can muster enough votes. Meanwhile, for a parliamentary democracy, just like our country Malaysia, it is a form of representative democracy in which political power is vested in an elected legislature, but the executive and legislative branches are not separate. The elected legislature, or the parliament, chooses the chief executive or the prime minister. The legislature may remove the prime minister at any time by a vote of no confidence and often approves the prime minister's cabinet members. The fusion of the legislative and executive branches in the parliamentary system leads to party members voting along party lines. I hope it is clear for you, yeah, guys. Okay, we move on to the next one, still under democracy system, yeah. Okay, why democracy system? Because it offers accountable and legitimate government. Number 2, it improves the quality of decision making. Number 3, provides a method to deal with differences and conflicts. Number 4, allows people to correct their own mistakes. Number 5, promotes equality among citizens. And number 6, enhances the dignity of the citizens. So I have already boiled all the keywords for you to remember, yeah, the important keywords. And then factors that support the development of democracy. The first one, the growth of a good education system among the people of a country. And then the positive economic growth experienced by the country. All of these points, I mean education and economic, were mentioned by Martin Seymour Lipset, yeah, in 1960 in Political Man, The Social Bosses of Politics. So remember this name, yeah, Lipset. And then why Malaysian democracy is interesting. But Lipset's premise is not so successful in explaining why democracy is not growing well in countries such as South Korea, Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, and even Malaysia. Despite of these countries enjoying a good education system and decent economic growth over the past 5 decades, their democracy is not considered as good enough yet here. Okay, if you can see here, this is the point that being mentioned by Lipset. Education and economic growth just now. However, all of these countries, just like Malaysia, is not considered as good enough yet, yeah? So the situation makes the study of democracy in Malaysia more interesting to study. Okay, next one, we move on to look at the early development of democracy in Malaysia. This is more to history, yeah? History explanation. So early development of democracy in Malaysia. Malaysia practices parliamentary democracy with constitutional monarchy. His Majesty the King is the head of state. Still remember this one? Meanwhile, for Prime Minister, he is the head of government. Parliament is the most important important institution in a country which practices the principles of democracy. The Parliament of Malaysia, consisting of the Senate and the House Representatives, held its first meeting on 11 September 1959. Okay, this is the history, yeah? Parliament of Malaysia. Malaya. Okay, so historical events lead towards parliamentary democracy in Malaysia. So if you can see here, I have already divided the events into 3 categories. Yeah? The pre-independence or post-World War II period, and then followed by the independence period. It's obvious, it is related to the year 1957, where Malaya gained its independence, and then towards Malaysia. Towards Malaysia, you can see already the date and year related is 1962 until 1963. Okay, let's take a look at the first one, the pre-independence or post-World War II. Okay, in 1946 first, yeah? So why 1946 is very important? Besides, apart from this year is the end of World War II, it is also the year where an advisory council was formed and had 13 members representing the Malay states and 2 strait settlements, Malacca and Penang. Meanwhile, the British tried to unite the 3 systems of administration, which are the Federated Malay States, Unfederated Malay States, and Strait Settlements, Malacca and Penang, through the Malayan Union. However, the Malayan Union was greatly opposed by the Malays led by Dato' Onn Jaafar, who was then the president of United Malays National Organizations, or UMNO. I bet you all already know this very well, yeah? Because I have mentioned many times before about UMNO, Malayan Union and the year when these two was formed. Yeah? The Malayan Union, it is right after World War II, 1946, and then followed by UMNO, because the leader, Dato' On Jafar, was the one who opposed Malayan Union. You have to be really concerned about this fact here, because this is where it all started. It was felt that the Malayan Union would deprive the Malay rulers of their sovereignty. That is why they opposed Malayan Union. Okay, 1948. In 1948, resistance against the Malayan Union resulted in the Federation of Malaya Agreement in 1948. We have already learned about this as well, right? The Federal Legislative Council was established, which replaced the Federal Council at the federal level. The Federal Legislative Council consisted of 75 members, 3 ex-officio, 11 from the Malay states and the Straits Settlements, 11 British officials, and 50 unofficial members. This was the first time the Legislative Council had 2/3 unofficial majority. The agreement was another step taken by the British to formulate the basic principles of a government with Parliament. You have to remember that, yeah? Okay, next one. In the year 1951, a member system, which was the forerunner of the present cabinet system, was introduced. A member system, yeah? Members were entrusted with several portfolios under their charge. Okay, in 1955, this one is obviously very important year, because in 1955 also Malaya had its first elections, yeah? Okay, the Federal Legislative Council, established under the Federation of Malaya Agreement, was dissolved to make way for a general election. This marked the first time that the people of Malaya went to the polls to elect their representatives to the Federal Legislative Council. In the first general elections, the alliance, which were United Malays National Organization, or UMNO, Malaysian Chinese Association, MCA, and Malaysian Indian Congress, MIC, won 51 out of 52 seats contested. Then, Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra was appointed the first Chief Minister of the Federation of Malaya, and thereby formed his first cabinet. Members of Federal Legislative Council were increased to 98 members. 52 elected members replaced 50 unofficial members. 35 nominated members represented various interests. The remaining 11 was made up of chief ministers of the 9 Malay states and 1 representative each from Penang and Malacca, from the Straits Settlements. Yeah? This event was a significant progress towards achieving parliamentary democracy in the nation. Please remember that. Okay, during the independence period in 1957. In 1957, a constitution for a fully independent and sovereign Malaya was drawn up by an independent body of distinguished jurists from several Commonwealth countries headed by Lord Reed. Okay, Lord Reed, yeah, he is very famous. I bet you know him very well. The Federal Constitution was anonymously adopted by the Federal Legislative Council, and it was decided that parliamentary democracy based on the Westminster model was best for the country. Tunku Abdul Rahman Putra was appointed as the first Prime Minister of Malaya, and his cabinet consisted of 12 members. On the 31st of August 1957, independence was declared at Merdeka Stadium. The Federal Legislative Council remained a unicameral parliament until its dissolution in June 1959. Okay, the third period, which is towards Malaysia in 1962, the Cobble Commission led by Lord Cobble was entrusted with the task of holding a referendum in Sabah and Sarawak to determine whether the people of those two states supported the proposal to create the Federation of Malaysia, consisting of Malaya, Singapore, Sabah and Sarawak. The report stated the majority of the people in the two states agreed to the proposal, and the report of the Cobalt Commission was accepted. Hence, in 1963, the Federation of Malaya, United Kingdom and Northern Ireland, Singapore, Sabah and Sarawak agreed to the terms of the Malaysia Agreement. The state legislatures in Singapore, Sabah and Sarawak passed resolutions enabling the establishment of Malaysia. Malaysia was declared on 16th of September in 1963. The House of Representatives at that time consisted of 159 members, which are 104 from Peninsular Malaysia, 16 from Sabah, 24 from Sarawak, and 15 from Singapore. The Senate comprised of 50 members, in which 28 members represented the 14 state legislatures, and another 22 members were nominated by His Majesty the King. His Majesty the Third King, Tuanku Syed Putra Ibni Almarhum Syed Hassan Jamalulail, officiated the Parliament complex near the Lake Perdana on 2nd November 1963. So the first Parliament was dissolved on the 1st March of 1964, and the second general election was held on 25th April of 1964. So that's all, yeah. Next one, scholars' views on Malaysian democracy. The political system in Malaysia is, however, often located between democracy and authoritarianism. According to Zakaria Haji Ahmad in 1989, he used to call Malaysian democracy as quasi-democracy, and William Case in 1993, semi-democracy. Meanwhile, for Diane K. Mauzi in 1993 as well, she used to call Malaysian democracy as coercive constitutionalism. And then Gordon P. Mintz in 1996, soft authoritarianism. Harold Crouch in 1996 as well, neither democracy nor authoritarian and repressive responsive regime. Okay, what is actually authoritarianism, yeah, guys? Okay, I know that you understand democracy concept very well, but authoritarianism, it is a form of government in which the ruler is an absolute dictator, not restricted by a constitution or laws or opposition and act, yeah? Okay, in detail of what is authoritarianism, political scientists use the term authoritarianism to describe a way of governing that values order and control over personal freedom. A government run by authoritarianism is usually headed by a dictator. The noun authoritarianism is most often used in a negative context to describe a government with absolute control over the population. This kind of government uses military threats, suppression of a free press, and disinformation to manage the people over whom it rules. Many people consider China to be an example of an authoritarian government today. The word itself can be traced back to the Latin auctor, means master, leader, or author. Okay, the synonyms for authoritarianism is like Caesarism, Stalinism, absolutism, despotism, dictatorship, monarchy, one-man rule, shogunate, totalitarianism, and also tyranny. And then it is a type of autocracy or a political system governed by a single individual. And then there are 5 stages or phases in Malaysian democracy. We will look into this one by one, yeah, but for this week, we will only look at number 1 and number 2. Okay, what is number 1? Moderate constitutional power sharing arrangement started from 1957, independence period, yeah, until 1969. And then second period, authoritarian Malay dominance started from 1969 until 19 81. Okay, you will look shortly why. Why number 1 is called moderate constitutional power sharing, and then why the second period is called authoritarian Malay dominance. Alright guys, so we move on to the core content of our lesson for today, which is the phase 1. Okay, phase 1, moderate constitutional power sharing, compromise and cooperation in 1957 until 1969. So it is under Tunku Abdul Rahman's reign. In the first half of the 1950s, constitutionalism won the day over multiracial politics. The differences between the ethnic groups were preserved, and the electorate chose to be represented through the elites of the ethnic community. Okay, why I highlight elites here? Because you already know that constitutionalism is a power sharing between elites, Regime maintenance through constitutional bargaining among the inter-ethnic elite for sharing cooperation. And then motives for constitutional power sharing. The first one, the presence of perceived external pressure or threat. Pressure from the British to establish inter-ethnic cooperation as a condition for independence. You already know inter-ethnic meaning, right? Inter-ethnic means when other ethnics cooperate together in achieving one mission, which is in terms of Malaysian politics for independence, And then the threat of Indonesian confrontation. Number 2, unstable political hegemony and weak economic position. MCA has the financial power. Meanwhile, UMNO has voting power. Long-term political considerations, more substantial political power of the Malay derive from their numerical superiority. For the Chinese, which is MCA, political power necessary for ensuring their strong economic position. So, both of these parties decided to cooperate and work together, Having survived the challenge from multiracialism in the 1950s, constitutionalism had to contend with intense outbidding on ethnic issues in the late 1960s. For example, the 1967 legislation to make Malay sole national language alienated non-Malay MCS supporters who felt the alliance was moving to the Malay right. Yet the Malay masses were frustrated by the Tunku administration's gradualist approach rather than drastic state intervention to improve their material well-being. Okay, I have highlighted Tunku administration's gradualist approach here. Okay, this approach is finally making Tunku Abdul Rahman step down, Okay, if you want to know, shortly I will explain it to you, don't worry. The legitimacy of elites' claims to community leadership was seriously eroded by their performance in 1969 general elections. So the 1969 general elections is really important, because these elections finally led to an interesting event in Malaysian politics, which is the 13 May 1969 tragedy. Okay, we will look at it shortly. The Chinese party commanded only 13.5% of the total votes and 13 out of 33 contested seats. UMNO too suffered. The alliance received only 54.2% of the Malay votes, down from 67.2% in 1964. This does not suggest less popularity among Malays than non-Malays, but the fact that the vote swing occurred within both communities indicated that constitutionalism was in crisis. Then the May 13, 1969 racial riot worsened everything. Now we move on to look at the tragedy that happened in 1969. Okay, This is the chronology of the 13 May 1969 tragedy. Okay, I want you to concentrate on what I'm going to say about the chronology, because I don't really have slides for it. So I just want you to pay attention with what I'm going to talk about this tragedy. So the first one, General Election 1969. In the 1969 10 May election, the governing coalition, which is the Alliance Party, faced a strong challenge from the opposition parties, in particular the two newly formed and mainly Chinese parties, the Democratic Action Party (DAP) and Parti Gerakan. Okay, the result showed that the alliance had won less than half of the popular vote, a large setback for the ruling coalition. On the national level, the alliance had gained a majority in the number of seats in the parliament, albeit a significantly reduced one. The number of seats won by the Chinese component of the alliance, the Malaysian Chinese Association (MCA), had been reduced by half. On the state level, the alliance had only gained the majority in Selangor by cooperating with the sole independent candidate, as the opposition had tied with the alliance for control of the Selangor state legislature, although at that time immediately after the election it was unclear that the alliance would still have control. The alliance lost control of Kelantan to PAS in Perak, and the opposition Gerakan won control of the state government in Penang. So Gerakan won control over Penang in this 1969 election. Okay, second phase, which was the celebration, an early event here. On the night of 11 and 12 May, the opposition parties, DAP and Gerakan, celebrated their success in the election. In particular, a large Gerakan procession welcomed the Gerakan leader, V. David. The parades by the opposition parties were alleged to be highly provocative, with non-Malays taunting Malays. Some supporters of the opposition were said to have driven past the residence of the Selangor Chief Minister and demanded that he abandon the residence in favor of a Chinese. The celebrations by the opposition parties were seen as an attack on Malay political power. Although the election results still favored the Malays despite losers, the Malay newspaper Utusan Melayu suggested in an editorial that the results had jeopardized the future of Malay rule and that prompt action was required to shore it up. On 12 May, members of UMNO Youth indicated to Selangor Menteri Besar of Selangor, Datuk Harun Haji Idris, that they wanted to hold a victory parade. UMNO then announced a procession which would start from the Harun bin Idris residence. Tunku Abdul Rahman would later call the retaliatory parade inevitable, as otherwise the party members would be demoralized after the show of strength by the opposition and the insults that had been thrown at them. Malays were brought from the rural areas into Kuala Lumpur, which was then a predominantly Chinese city. Thousands of Malays, some of them armed, arrived to join the parade. Okay, the riot begins. On the morning of 13 May, Malays began to gather at the residence of Selangor Menteri Besar, Datuk Harun Haji Idris, on Jalan Raja Muda, on the edge of Kampung Baru, although some were already there as early as Sunday evening. You see, they are very motivated here to join the parade, but actually it has a hidden agenda. The Malays came from various parts of Selangor, such as Morib, Harun's constituency, and Banting, and some may have came from parts of Perak. According to the NOC official report, at around 6 p.m., fist fights broke out in Setapak between a group of Malays from Gombak traveling to the rally and Chinese bystanders who taunted them, and this escalated into bottle and stone throwing. News of the fighting then reached the gathering crowd in Jalan Raja Muda, and shortly before 6:30 p.m., many Malays broke off from the rallying point at the Chief Minister's house and headed through adjoining Chinese sections. The Malays, armed with parangs and kris, burned cars and shops, killed and looted in the Chinese areas. According to Time, at least 8 Chinese were killed in the initial attack. Once violence broke out, it spread rapidly and uncontrollably throughout the city within 45 minutes to Jalan Campbell, Jalan Tunku Abdul Rahman, Batu Road, Kampung Datok Keramat, Kampung Pandan, Cheras, and Kampung Kerinci. The official death toll was 196. So according to legitimate source, this number mainly come from the Chinese, yeah. And then the aftermath. The Rukun Negara was a reaction to the riot. It was introduced on 31st of August 1970 as a way to foster unity among Malaysians. The Malay nationalist politician Mahathir Mohamad at that time, who was then little known and lost his seat as an UMNO candidate in the 10 May election, blamed the riot on the government, especially the Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman, for being simple-minded and not planning for a prosperous Malaysia where the Malays have a share of the economic stake. The Tunku in turn blamed extremists such as Mahathir for the racial clashes, which led to the expulsion of Mahathir from UMNO. It propelled Mahathir to write his seminal work, The Malay Dilemma, in which he posited a solution to Malay's racial tensions based on aiding the Malays economically through an affirmative action program. The affirmative action policies included the New Economic Policy, NEP, and the creation of Kuala Lumpur as a federal territory out of Selangor State in 1974, 5 years later. After the riots, Tunku Abdul Rahman was forced into the background with the day-to-day running of the country handed to the Deputy Prime Minister, Tun Abdul Razak, who was also the director of the National Operations Council. Hence, on 22nd September 1970, when the parliament reconvened, Tunku resigned his position as Prime Minister and Tunku Abdul Razak took over. I hope everything is clear, yeah? Okay, what is the significance of 13 May 1969 riot? The incidents, yeah? It is significant in Malaysian politics as it led to the Prime Minister Tunku Abdul Rahman stepping down from office to be succeeded by Tun Abdul Razak, and eventually resulted in a change in government policy that would favor Malays by the implementation of the New Economic Policy, or NEP. So it is the indicator of the new era or phase of political administration in Malaysia. Okay, we have come to phase 2. So phase 2 related to authoritarian Malay dominance, compromise to control, started from 1969 until 1981. Okay, why it is called Malay dominance? Because due to the riot in 1969, 30 May, okay, so Malays gain back its control, yeah? Okay, it is under Tun Abdul Razak Hussein's reign. Okay, he diffused the crisis through carrots and sticks. So what is exactly carrots and sticks meaning? Okay, the phrase carrot and stick is a metaphor, yeah, guys, for the use of a combination of reward and punishment to induce a desired behavior. In politics, carrot or stick sometimes refers to the realist concept of soft and hard power. Soft and hard comes together. The carrot in this context could be the promise of economic or diplomatic aid between nations, while the stick might be the threat of military action by the government here. Okay. Next one, he doubled down on the alliance constitutional coalition by co-opting several opposition parties and also ethnic parties from Sabah and Sarawak into a new coalition called Barisan Nasional, or BN. His administration also passed a slow legislation criminalizing any act, speech or publication on fundamental issues such as Bumiputra special rights, non-Malay citizenship, the position of Islam and Malay as the sole national language, and affirmative action. By doing so, Razak curtailed the democratic rights of citizens and their elected representatives to debate and question government policies and legislation on this important political issue. Yet he was able to cement the ethnic elites, loosening grip on their political leadership over their community. His action also shielded his radical affirmative action plan, the New Economic Plan, NEP, from critics. The balance of power in Barisan Nasional's constitutionalism after 1969 was tilted to UMNO Malays as the dominant component party, in contrast to the alliance constitutionalism, where power was more evenly distributed. As an example, the powerful portfolio of Ministry of Finance, or MOF, was never again given to MCA after the second Razak cabinet. It's obvious, right? Malay has been dominating the cabinet. UMNO was no longer financially reliant on MCA elections, operatives, and expenses. The mutual veto device identified by Litchfield greatly eroded. The Grand Coalition, however, survived and expanded. Constitutionalism continued a largely uninterrupted domination over Malaysian politics until 2008. Okay, next one. This is Tun Hussein On. Tun Hussein On, periods of reign from 1976 until 1981. Tun Hussein On was the third Prime Minister after Tun Abdul Razak. He was renowned for stressing the issue of unity through policies aimed at rectifying economic imbalances between the various communities found in Malaysia. Okay, if you still remember, Tun Hussein On is Bapak Perpaduan, yeah? That is why if you see here, I highlighted unity through policies aimed at rectifying economic imbalances. So in 20 April 1981, the National Unit Trust Scheme was being launched. He also gave serious consideration to the concept of Rukun Tetangga ya, not Rukun Negara, a neighborhood watch scheme, and the fight against the drug menace. He underwent a coronary bypass in early 1981. Then on 17 July 1981, he retired from active politics and relinquished his Prime Minister post due to health concerns. He was succeeded by Mahathir Mohamad, his deputy. Okay class, I think that's all for today. We're going to continue the lesson next week after your midterm break. So thank you for your attention. As usual, please take care and stay safe, yeah?